Hi guys, welcome to my channel. I'm Maddie, and in today's video I'm sharing 24 books that I think you should read in 2024. These are just some of my favorite books, and hopefully they'll become some of your favorite books as well. There are multiple genres here as well as multiple age ranges, we'll say. So let's go ahead and get started with the list. This is in no particular order, just kind of what I thought about when I look at my Goodreads data, etc. At number 1, I have Bridge to Terabithia by Katherine Paterson. This is a children's book, but honestly I read this for the first time as an adult, I think when I was 24 or 25, and I just fell in love with it. This is a great book to read with your child if you have a child who's like middle grade or a little bit more mature, probably anywhere from like 4th grade to 8th grade. I think that it could really be an impactful read to read with them together and to discuss. It sounds like it's going to be a fantasy, but it's not. It's about two children who are kind of like outcasts in their grade. The first is Jess. He grows up on a farm. He has all sisters, but kind of like a macho type of dad. So his dad really doesn't like that Jess is pursuing art and instead wants him to, you know, be like the fastest runner and to do farm work. And then the new girl in town named Leslie. Leslie has really short hair, which this is told back in like the 50s, I want to say, and so that's really irregular. At first when Jess sees Leslie, he doesn't even know if she's a boy or a girl, and just kind of how these two misfits find each other and they are like totally each other's people, and just a great story about being yourself and individuality. And I cry every single time I read this book. It's just so beautiful. At number 2, we have a classic. I've read this book 3 times in my entire life. The first time I read it was in 5th grade, and then I read it when I was 20 to see if I still loved it, and I did, and then I listened to it on audiobook recently. This book is Little Women by Louisa Alcott. Whenever I think of this book, I also always think of that episode of Friends where Rachel and Joey, they swap books, and Rachel has to read The Shining and Joey has to read Little Women, and he's always confused that Jo is a girl and Lori is a boy. It's always what I think about, but this is a really great book. If you've never read it, it is one of the classics that I think is just great. I will say the first few chapters are a little too like picturesque, like Sound of Music singing type of deal. Not really my favorite, but from there it gets really good. This is about the 4 March sisters and them going through life and kind of just like the different avenues that they take, and each sister is really different. You have the oldest sister, Meg, who goes down this like stereotypical path of motherhood. You have Jo, who is tomboy. She wants to be a writer. She doesn't want to go down that typical no career motherhood path that is kind of being force fed to her in the times. You have Beth, who is like terribly shy, who I relate to so much, who is just so sweet, and she loves animals and she loves knitting and she loves children, but she doesn't really like to interact with new people or adults. And then you have Amy, who is the youngest, who is kind of like your stereotypical like young child, kind of bratty. She's really like the best looking one, she knows it. So it's really interesting to see them grow up. If you're someone who likes stories where you get to follow characters throughout their life and you get to watch them from childhood to them being an adult, you're gonna love this one. It's probably the first book that I ever read that was in that style where I got to grow with the characters, and I just love each March sister differently. The third book that I do have here is another children's book. This is Holes by Louisa Sachar, and I read this recently. Of course, I read it when I was a kid, and I saw the movie with Shia LaBeouf, which I still definitely do recommend, but I actually reread this recently, and it held up. It's still a 5 out of 5 star for me. I think it's just a perfect read. It's about Stanley Yelnats, and Stanley is accused of stealing a famous person's shoe. This famous player, he's a baseball player, he donated his stinky shoe, that's kind of like his thing, to a charity event, and Stanley ends up with them, and he's accused of stealing these shoes, and he's sent to go work basically at a child's prison camp. He's sent to work in the Texas desert digging holes, and just his whole experience there and the other boys he interacts with, and there's a whole mystery there. This is the perfect story if you're looking for a story about morality, if you're looking for a story that has like some folktale type of vibes to it, and if you're just looking for a good adventure, this is another great one to read with your child if you have one. Getting into my first like adult book. At number 4 I have The Storied Life of Fikry. This is by Gabrielle Zevin, who has become one of my favorite authors. This story is great for any book lover. It follows a man named Fikry. He runs a bookstore, just like a quaint little shop in his town. He's kind of a grump, and you'll find out why he's a grump. And then it also follows other people in the town and how they're interwoven into AJ's life. So it is a little cheesy, it is a little Lifetime movie, it is a little bit cliched, but it's done and written so beautifully that it didn't bother me. Sometimes I don't really like those tropes, but I went with it. So this is another one where you get to follow characters over years, and it's just one of the most beautiful books that I've ever read. You just end up falling in love with every single character, or having disdain for the characters that you're supposed to have disdain for, but every single character in this book I think is so well rounded. At number 5 we have a young adult novel, but I read this when I was probably 24 and I still really connected to it. This is Orbiting Jupiter by Schmidt, and this follows a teenage boy. This teenage boy, he lives on a farm, and his family decides to foster another teenage boy, and the two boys become close. And as they become close, the teenage boy who lives on the farm, he starts to realize his life is very different from the foster boy, and we learn the foster boy's story, which involves a baby named Jupiter and how he came into having to go into the foster system. It's a really short read, but it's really impactful. At number 6 we have our first nonfiction piece, and this is one that I would definitely recommend that you listen to on audiobook. I love listening to nonfiction books on audiobook, and this is read by the author. This is called Know My Name by Chanel Miller, and she is a survivor of sexual assault, and this is a heartbreaking story. It's a true story, and it is so heartbreaking because the judicial system just let her down in every avenue, and how they treated the man who assaulted her versus how they treated her, and how the media treated her is just so disgusting and so wrong. And at no point does Chanel ever make herself a victim or a martyr. Instead, she brings power to her story. She wants to help other people who are survivors, and it's just such a beautiful story, and I am so glad and so much better for listening to this. Number 7 we have Long Bright River by Liz Moore. This is a 5 out of 5 star for me. This is kind of like thriller suspense. This is about a cop named Mickey. Mickey has a sister named Casey who is a drug addict, and one day Casey goes missing. Mickey and Casey are kind of estranged, but you know, hearing your sister go missing, you kind of put all your feelings aside and you try and solve it. So she tries to solve what happens to Casey, and in doing so she finds out a lot about their past together, and just about the drug epidemic that's happening in their town and overtaking it. And it sounds really cliched, but it was really well done, and there were a few twists in there that I didn't see coming. At number 8, this is probably my favorite read of 2023. This is Beartown by Fredrik Bachman. I absolutely love this story. It starts out as a typical just like hockey town story. You just really learn about the town and how they're obsessed with hockey. They're a factory town, and all they really have to look forward to is their high school hockey team, which sounds kind of sad, but that's kind of small town living when you don't really have anything else. And a lot of the guys who still live in Beartown, they used to be on the hockey team, so they see themselves in these younger players. And then at about page 150, everything changes. Something happens to the general manager of the hockey team's daughter and the star player. And from there, I swear, I cried for like the next 100 pages. It is just such a beautiful book with such an important message. And there are 2 other books in the Beartown trilogy as well, but I definitely recommend that you read Beartown at least, and I think you're going to be better for it. At number 9, we have another nonfiction book. This is a memoir called The Ugly Cry by Danielle Henderson. This is another one that I would definitely recommend that you listen to on audiobook. This book is very real. It does deal with some very real tragic issues, such as her mother abandons her. There is sexual assault in here as well. And basically Danielle and her brother, they end up growing up with their grandmother as their primary caretaker, since their mom keeps jumping in and out of their life and choosing men over her children. And Danielle's grandmother is like so no nonsense. She's so funny, and just the lessons that Danielle learned from having this childhood and having been raised by her grandmother, they're just such beautiful lessons. And the way that Danielle tells it, the humor is just impeccable, and it takes some of these heavier moments and it makes them light without detracting from what's happening, and her humor is seriously unmatched. At number 10, we have The 100 Years of Lenni and Margot by Marianne Cronin, and I didn't really know what to think when I went into this book, but I ended up just loving this. So this is about two different women. So we have a 17-year-old named Lenni and an 83-year-old named Margot, and they meet at the hospital because they both are sick for different reasons, obviously with their ages. I'm sure you guys can figure out, you know, one has a chronic illness and then one is kind of just like old age. So they're both in the hospital, they meet up, and they think it's really funny that if they add their ages together, it equals 100. And it just goes through kind of their backstory and their lives and what these two learn from each other despite them having such a large age gap. And it's just a really beautiful story. It's one that I just could not put down. Number 11, we have Flowers for Algernon by Danielle Keyes. This is a really touching, really beautiful story. So it's science fiction, but it kind of reads as realistic fiction. The premise is our main character, Charlie. He starts out with a really low IQ. He has an IQ of about 60, and he's been living his life just up until this point with this low IQ. And Charlie knows he's not very intelligent, and so he seeks out these classes at a special education unit to try and boost his intellect, to try and learn how to read and help him in his everyday life. And while he's there, he gets recommended for a program for them to go in and do brain surgery and raise his IQ. So slowly, Charlie's IQ starts to raise, and in fact, at the end, it doubles, and Charlie realizes, is it better to have an average IQ? Is it better to have a low IQ? Is it better to have a hard IQ? And just kind of that being intelligent doesn't solve all your problems, and in fact, you know, having that lower IQ, that kind of made him more blind to the world and how they were treating him. And it's just a really thought-provoking book. I really enjoyed it, and again, it's another extremely fast read. It's written in diary entries by Charlie, and you really watch Charlie's thought process grow throughout the book. Number 12, we have another memoir. This one's called Beautiful Boy, A Father's Journey Through His Son's Addiction. This is by David Sheff, and he is a journalist who has a son named Nicholas. Nicholas, from pretty much his teenage years, has been into partying and drugs, and David, as his father, he's just kind of unfortunately had to watch Nicholas self-destruct, and it's just how their relationship is affected, how Nicholas is your typical addict. He lies, he steals, he does these really terrible things, but David still loves Nicholas. He still wants Nicholas to get better. And just, if you've ever had anyone in your life who's dealt with addiction, I think this is a very real depiction of it. There is another book as well called Tweak, which is told from Nicholas's point of view. And there's also a movie as well that stars Steve Carell and Timothy Chalamet, which I haven't seen it, but it looks really good. At number 13, we have The Color Purple. This is a very heavy book, but it's a very important book. This follows two African-American sisters who are living in Georgia in the early 20th century, and just how horrible they're treated, basically. And there's a lot that goes into this, and essentially just how horrible they're treated and how horribly society treats them, but how they still have strength throughout it all. And it's really hard book at times to read, but a really beautiful book as well. They recently just remade the movie. The original movie was not a musical. This new one that they made is a musical, but I haven't seen either movie, but the book was really, really one that sticks with you. Number 14, we have Calling Me Home by Julie Kibler, and this is a really interesting story. This is historical fiction. Present day, it follows a black hairdresser. She's doing her elderly white client's hair, and her elderly client asks if she can road trip with her to go and see something in her past. And you learn about this white client's past and the segregation, and about what this white client had to sacrifice for herself, and how the white client had to go through this harrowing love affair with a black man. and then how even in present day we still don't treat interracial couples correctly. We still don't treat those things correctly, and it's very eye-opening. Number 15, we have a graphic novel. This is a children's graphic novel, but I really enjoyed this story. It is a memoir graphic novel, so it's called El Deafo by Cece Bell, and Cece is born deaf, and just how growing up deaf really impacted her, and how she created this alter ego of herself called El Deafo to get through just everyday life and bullying, and it's a really inspiring read. I'm not a big fan of graphic novels, but I really like this one. At number 16, we have Ghost by Jason Reynolds. Ghost is about a foster child. His name is Ghost, that's what he goes by, and basically all he cares about and all he believes in is running. So he ends up joining a track team, and he meets some other foster children, some other misfits on the track team. And basically throughout the novel, Ghost is struggling between this inner anger that he has and struggling to be the best version of himself. And I think it is a book that's very relatable to everyone that has any sort of trauma, any sort of anger in their life. And it's like the balance of like, I know I should be better, but I'm just so pissed off. 17, we have another historical fiction book. This is called The Great Alone by Kristen Hanna. So this takes place in Alaska in 1974. This follows the Albright nuclear family. So we have the dad, we have the mom, and then we have the daughter who is a teenager. So they move to Alaska. The dad is very abusive, and he's kind of like a survivalist. Just shows kind of his deterioration. Dad is an army vet, so he does have some PTSD, and basically over the years it just shows how his mind is starting to deteriorate and how he's just getting worse, especially now that he's in Alaska where it's a little bit more dangerous. We watch the mom and the daughter, Lenni and Cora, try and find strength to keep going on, and they have their own plot as well. I will say the ending does get pretty Lifetime movie-ish, which wasn't my favorite, but overall I think it was a really good read. At number 18, we have Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingslover. This is the type of book that is going to make you laugh, make you cry, and make you just want to jump through the pages and give characters hugs. This is a story that takes place in southern Appalachia. This follows Demon, or his real name is Damon. As he goes through his life, he is born to a single mother who is a teenager and a drug addict, and how that affects him throughout his life. And he's never known his father. He just knows that his father has the same name as him, Damon Copperhead. And all he knows about his father is that his father died in a tragic accident, and just how that affects him growing up, and he's bounced from place to place. I will say the middle of this novel does definitely drag, but overall it's a really great read. Again, it does deal with addiction. At number 19, we have Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelley Van Pelt. This is one of those great novels if you like a good full circle novel where everything ties up neatly at the end. So this is about an octopus, which is a really unique way. I've never seen an octopus depicted in a story like this before. An octopus named Marcellus. He's being stored at an aquarium, which is like kind of inhumane. And then also an elderly woman who works at the aquarium named Tova. Tova's very lonely, and she's always wondered what's happened to her son Eric. Eric had a tragic accident when he was a teenager, and she's just always wondered, did he kill himself, did he not? So as Tova tells Marcellus the octopus this story, Marcellus pieces everything together and he solves the mystery for her, and it's a really unique read. I really enjoyed it. You do definitely have to suspend disbelief on this one. Number 20, we have The Mothers by Britt Bennett. This is the same author of The Vanishing Half, which is another really great book. So The Mothers follows 3 characters throughout their life. The main character, Nadia, is this beautiful, intelligent girl. She's kind of seen around her tight-knit Black community as like a girl who's going places. Nadia's mother did kill herself at one point, so she's also seen as kind of like this broken creature. Then you have Aubrey. Aubrey is new to town, and her and Nadia become really fast friends. Aubrey is just a very pure character. She's really into religion and the church. And then of course we have a boy at the center of it. This boy's name is Luke Shepard. He is a football player who got injured and is now back in the hometown. He's a little bit older than these girls, and he is also the pastor's son. So just kind of how their 3 stories intersect and take place. There's betrayal, there's heartbreak, there's love, and there's a secret at the middle of all of it. At number 21, we have my favorite Stephen King novel. This is called The Green Mile. This takes place in a prison, and the Green Mile represents the walk to death row. And on death row, we have a new prisoner. He's a gigantic man named John Coffey. He's accused of raping and killing 2 girls, and all of these weird, mysterious things start happening whenever John Coffey joins this prison, and people are wondering, is John Coffey the devil reincarnated? Is he otherworldly? Is he something else? And the message that you get from this book is just unmatched. Number 22, I have The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls. Again, this is another memoir. This follows a family who has this very charismatic father. Some days he's really fun, he's really normal. Other days when he's drinking, he's extremely dishonest and abusive and destructive to the whole family. So Jeanette and her siblings have to learn to take care of themselves from a very young age, and also kind of to live life on the edge of not knowing stability. At number 23, we have Educated by Tara Westover. This is another memoir. This follows a family in the mountains of Idaho. They're survivalists, and they have a lot of children. They don't believe in modern medicine or sending their children to school or even getting a social security card. This is about a family who kind of chooses sides. Some of the children, they rebel against this, and they end up going through the educational track, and they end up going to college, which their father in particular seems as like a big betrayal. And then we have some of the other family members who follow the father blindly, and even though he injures them, he yells at them, he's abusive to them, that's all they know and that's all they're comfortable with. Sorry if it's an angle changer, my last thought just got cut off, my camera died. So really quickly, at number 24, I recommend that you go back and you read any Junie B. Jones book by Barbara Park possible. The kindergarten series are my favorite. I like it a little bit more than Junie B. Jones' First Grader, and the reason why I recommend reading a Junie B. Jones book is because they are still hilarious even as an adult. I would recommend Junie B. Jones and the Stupid Smelly Bus, which is her first one, or Junie B. Jones Loves Handsome Warren is really funny, The Yucky Buggy Fruitcake. These are some of the books that made me fall in love with reading, and just revisiting those books as an adult, I think it is just so full circle and so beautiful, and they're not literary classics, but they are really funny. Those are my 24 books to read in 2024. Let me know in the comments down below, what are some books that you recommend? If you did enjoy this video, please make sure you give it a thumbs up and you hit the subscribe button.